Welcome to the Wisdom Forest project, which is a series of interviews of people that really inspired me personally, and I know they will inspire so many other people by their knowledge, by their value. So I'm very excited because today is the first interview of this series, and I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to interview my dear teacher, Rekha Tandon. So she has many chords at her bow, and just to mention a few, she is a choreographer, she is a classical Indian dancer, so she has studied Odissi, classical Indian dance, for over 17 years. She's the co-founder of Dance Root. She's the author of Odissi, a dance of sculpture, as well as Dance as Yoga, the spirit and technique of Odissi. She lives now in Skandavan in Auroville in India, and that's where we had the interview. My first encounter with Rekha was a few years ago through her book, Dance as Yoga. And for me, it was such a big revelation because this book is a mixture of yoga, of tantra, and classical Indian dance. And it's basically all that I love and all that I have been studying over the past few years. I started with yoga, then I went with tantra, and then I went with classical Indian dance. And I remember when I started classical Indian dance, like 6 years ago, I really felt like, wow, this is for me a tantric practice. But it's not bring like that in the world, like classical Indian dance is just classical Indian dance. So for me, like meeting someone that is actually transmitting that was very, very helpful for my own inspiration, for my own growth. So I let you discover Rekha Tandon. At the moment of the interview, we were just finishing 1 month intensive retreat in her place in Skandavan in India, where we were diving into all those topics that I just mentioned. So I hope that she will inspire you as much as she inspired me. I let you dive into this interview with her. So welcome, Rekha.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to have you here.
I'm
very excited
to be here.
Good. And so today I would like to interview you and speak a bit about your passion and your life and your practice, because it's something that's very inspired me the past few months, few years. And so I wish that I hope that many people will be inspired also. So I want to start talking about your career as Odissi dancer, because you have been practicing and studying Odissi dance, which is one of the classical dance of India, for 17 years. And I know personally that it's one of the most difficult practice that I have tried. And so how did Odissi come to your life, and what did that taught you? Like, why did you stay 17 years studying Odissi?
I spent 17 years with 3 different teachers studying Odissi, but the process of studying Odissi has not stopped after that.
Yes.
It's been, it's more like a 40-year period of studying Odissi than a 17-year period.
Yeah.
Before I first saw Odissi, I had already done a few years as a very young child of Western ballet, and then I had studied 3 other styles in my boarding school in the north of India, in Dehradun. I had done bits of Bharatanatyam, Kathak and Manipuri. So when I first saw Odissi, it was I had already done quite a few years of other kinds of dancing, and I just loved its lyrical quality. So I decided to try it, and then I just fell in love with really its movement quality. And the play of this, very strong body and very relaxed, very strong lower body and very relaxed upper body. I just found it very appealing. It came into my body also very discovered the whole Radha Krishna mythology. And as a young teenager, it's a wonderful world to be transported into. So I think that was the beginning of the journey. And it is, there are so many aspects to it. When you're constantly dancing the stories of these, idyllic love poetry, idyllic, mythology where these wonderful things happen. And you're enacting those stories through movement and through rhythm and through song. It does totally, draw you in.
Yes.
So that's what happened. And also as a practice, energetically, it sort of makes you a lot more aware of how you inhabit your body. And the process of developing skill fine-tunes your senses.
And for those who are not familiar with Indian art in general, like how could you describe Odissi, like the origin and what are the influence of this practice?
All Indian classical dance forms, are tied up with the process of self-knowledge and self-discovery. All of them. The process of acquiring skill is a process of, developing more and more awareness and more refinement in the way you do things with yourself. So, and they were all connected to religion and to ritual and to over many, many centuries. So in that respect, Odissi is not special. It's like any of the others. It's just one other expression of one other branch of a very big tree. What makes Odissi different from other classical dance forms is it's really the use of the interpretation of the trunk of the tree. It's its own special branch, which is influenced by the region and the country. So it's influenced by, the literature in that part of the country, or the language, or the folk rhythms, or the musical elements, and the particular interpretation of myth and philosophy that grew in that branch of the tree. That's the only thing that makes Odissi a distinctly different flavor to other forms of dance.
So Odissi comes from the state of Orissa, in the east part of India, and there's a lot of influence from, it has been influenced by the sculpture in the temple, by the folk tradition, the rituals, so there's many other things. And in Orissa, the deity which is mainly worshipped is Jagannath, which is also another form of Krishna, and so Vishnu. So there is this Krishna energy a little bit around the dance.
And in that panorama, dance was an offering to the gods of the body, the mind, the spirit. And the deities, not the deities, the temple dancers who would perform the dance in front of the deity were married to the deity, so they were the wives of the god. And the offering of the dance was along with the offering of food and all other privileges that are offered to a king, because the temple was God's palace, and these were the wives of God. So there's a wonderful book by Frederick Margin called The Wives of God, about the tradition of temple dancers in Odisha, which your viewers would probably enjoy reading if they are interested in anthropology.
Thank you.
And so after the 17 years of intense practice, there was something which was shifting for you, and you decided you wanted to stop and you didn't want any more dance in your world. Can you explain us what was happening and what was this shift?
I have a deep love and respect for the Guru Shishya Parampara, but I found that the process of learning for me, where you learn by imitation and rote, and you don't ask questions, had created a situation where I was performing a lot. I was teaching in my teacher's school. I was very much in the dance space in New Delhi. But I always felt that I was talking a language that did not belong. I mean, I was dancing in texts that were in Sanskrit and Oriya. I did not think and feel in Sanskrit and Oriya. I also felt that if I wanted to explore anything on my own, because of the tradition and the lineage, and because I was so deeply entrenched in it, I had to take permission to breathe. And I was finding that very claustrophobic. I also felt that it was very much like speaking a language fluently but not being able to construct a single sentence of your own. And I talk about it in my book. And that is really because of the nature of training in retrospect, because I did go on to do a PhD in dance studies in Laban in London, which is performing arts. It's a place where teaching the performing arts is approached very differently. And what I really got from there was a view of another way of learning about the performing arts. And I felt that if we incorporate that kind of freedom in the learning process, the process of acquiring skill can go in a classical tradition, can go simultaneously with a sense of ownership and with the ability to express yourself better. That hadn't been the case with my training. So I had reached a point where I needed to move away from it and to reassess what I was doing. I was hooked. It was my way of being. And that's in a sense what made it more difficult. I had to break through that barrier for myself, really take ownership of my own tools. So that's what happened. So it made me go back to the early years of the creation of Odissi, because we had, since this was a temple tradition, we'd had a break of about 400 years in the history of Odissi, where all because of the collapse of the Hindu kingdoms that had patronized these art forms, they had all kind of broken up. And it was really after Indian independence where a concerted effort had been made to revision the classical arts as part of the cultural identity, reforming the cultural identity of the country. All the elements that go into an art form had been, in a sense, gathered and put together, and a new whole vision of Odissi had been rebirthed. And in a sense, in our training, we had I was a third generation performer. All this happened in the 1950s. I was a student in the 1980s. So by the time I was given the Odissi tradition by my gurus, it had already evolved, and the focus was very much on transmitting the choreography that had been created by the choreographers who had now become established gurus and had formed, in fact, different lineages. So that was the focus of our training.
Now, if you go to Odissi, it's mainly becoming a performance, a dance on stage. Odissi or all the other Indian dance. So it loses
well, it is going to be a performance on stage because that's how it had been made. But even in terms of the elements that go into making a performance, there are elements you need to learn. You need to understand how to do choreography. You need to understand rhythm, you need to understand melody, you need to understand text, you need to understand stagecraft. And you also need, because it's a classical dance form, you need to understand how to interpret text. You need to understand, the philosophical and cultural background of the materials that you are working with. And it's only when you have all these pieces, and you need to be inspired by it yourself. It's only when all these elements come together that you can assimilate the art form and make a contribution with it, or start speaking your own language with it. But we were not introduced to the dance form like that. We were introduced to it as set choreography with sentences of music that you learn by repetition, from basic steps to small sequences to large sequences, and you're on stage. And the training, the teaching, certainly for me was mainly in New Delhi, just a little bit in Odisha with the Chairman in his house. He was living in Cuttack over summer schools that he used to have. So you're quite, and you're young, so you're quite, all this, you're quite oblivious to all this.
And so you decided to create Dance Route. So can you explain what it is? What is your vision with that project?
Dance Routes was created after I went to London to study, and I met Michael. Michael was, his background was totally different to mine. He was a contemporary composer. He was writing for film and television. He'd been in a pop band when he was younger. I think our common link was that he was very interested in philosophy and in Hinduism. He'd been very closely associated with a Sri Lankan teacher who started a monastery with Indian temples in Wales. So that was our meeting ground. And he knew nothing about Odissi, and he knew nothing about Indian music, but he was deeply drawn to its quality and its symbolism and its background and its. So I think, in a sense, Dance Routes for me really became a way of developing work with Michael that would bring these two perspectives, our two energies together. And I had also come to the UK And I was being asked questions like, Odissi has these two pivotal positions, the Chauk and the Tribhan. And in terms of movement possibilities with them, it defines you a lot. And in a contemporary dance school, I was being asked questions like, what are you so hung up about the Chauk and Tribhan for? There's so many ways of, moving the body. So it had got me started in the process of looking at it in terms of, where these body postures were coming from and how they connected energetically to the whole tradition of what's known as the tantric body map, and how it shares an approach to the body with yoga, and so on and so forth. And these were all areas that you had a sort of intuitive awareness of, having grown up with these subjects, but they had never been, the wires had never been connected. And being forced to answer such questions for people from, performing arts backgrounds in different parts of the world and sharing contemporary classes or improvisation classes with them. And also, studying dance history and culture and context, these became areas I started exploring in a lot more detail. And in the process of exploring it, because I was living with Michael, we were developing, I was explaining it to him also. And we were bridging, we were creating these bridges of understanding. And then when I went with him to Orissa, to live in Orissa, we had all these temples around us. And we used to get onto our little two-wheeler and just go and hang out in the temples in the morning and start taking pictures. And at the same time I was doing my PhD, I felt it was important to present the context of the PhD as part of my research. So that's what resulted in our first real project, which was the Odissi Dance Sculpture video. And things, I think, just kind of developed from there. The fact that I was deconstructing traditional choreography, recreating pieces as part of what I was doing with my research, and developing and finding ways of working in a different language, or working with music he was making, or that's how it started, with little things, and then it became, we gave it a name, and once we did that and we started performing this kind of work, it became, and we were at the same time creating a lot of documentation and generally interviewing a lot of people, very much like you're doing this, who were part of the creative process of Odissi in the 50s and 60s. It just became a way of, taking our work together from not just the performance space, but to the research space. And then we started as a company, applying for grants to take the work forward, and got a lot of wonderful support from the National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, Ford Foundation, the East Zone Cultural Center in West Bengal, and other people. So that's how Dance Roots became a kind of umbrella for both research and development and performance work. And it was under that umbrella that we started teaching in a more integrated way, saying Odissi.
Yeah. Now we arrived to the topic that I particularly like. The topic of connecting dance, yoga, and tantra together. Because even for me, I've been studying yoga and tantra in a school in Thailand for a few years, and then I came to India to study dance. So I studied them separately, but as soon as I started dance, I felt inside of me that that was a tantric practice actually, but the way it was teaching, it was not said like this. So it was a feeling that I had. So when I discovered you and your book, I was like, oh, finally, I'm not crazy. This is really what's happening. And there is also people who believe that dance are also yogic and are tantric. So I'm really curious to hear when did tantra enter into your life and how this got integrated in your practice, in your dance practice. You mentioned it a little bit, but
Tantra is quite misunderstood.
Yeah, also.
As
thank you.
As being connected with sexuality, and yoga is considered basically, I mean generally, not basically. This is changing, getting into these postures and having a very fit body. And dance is considered a performing art, so they are looked at as separate things, but they all come from the same point. They all come from the same cultural bedrock or the same umbrella as pathways of self-knowledge and self-realization. And what is the self-knowledge and self-realization? Essentially, we think of ourselves as being this body and this mind, with all its individual experiences and its placement in the world. And we identify ourselves totally with it. But what both yoga and tantra and dance fundamentally teach is that this is not the story. It's not the whole story. You have another aspect to you. And yoga calls it the witness consciousness most commonly. Tantra will call it your Shakti, for example. I mean, we have so many, if we actually go into how this duality is approached through all the various pathways that have been opened to approach that bindu. In the Indian tradition, you'd spend hours just discussing it. Dance also tells you that if you dance beautifully, you feel, the presence of Lord Krishna or Shiva or Devi or whoever you're dancing with. Essentially, what are you doing in all these practices? You're dropping your limited view of yourself and you're transcending it. What are you transcending it to? You're transcending it to a state of awareness where you're not limited by your body. Doesn't mean you're not your body. Doesn't mean you're not your mind. But you're that as well. You're not just that. You kind of break through that covering on yourself. Now, whether it is the yogic part which teaches you about the 5 layers, the panchakoshas, where the physical body is the food shape, where the food is, and you have the breath shape, and you have the instinctive mind, and you have the Vijnana Maya, which constitutes your personality, your sanskars, and then within it you have the fifth sheep, the Ananda Maya. Hatha Yoga takes you through these. So you first do a posture, then you do a posture with breath, then you do a posture with breath, with awareness and central axis at a vital point. These layers fuse, and from being outwardly oriented, you fine-tune your awareness to maybe your alignment or to that. Yoga does it that way. What Tantra does is slightly different. What Tantra does is it celebrates the senses, but through the senses, it's a bit like when a fruit ripens from a tree, it falls. So when your senses are totally fulfilled, totally satiated, totally expressed, then you realize that there is something beyond it. That is tantric approach. So the tantric approach is very embracing. It's with the full rasa of life that you go beyond it, which is different to the ascetic approach of Buddhism, and I will share this, where you step back and you realize that there is something within you that exists without going out. Tantra, you go out fully. Where are you now, kind of thing, But they're all reaching the same place. So is dance. You dance so ecstatically and so fully that you forget who you are. You become one with the music, or you become one with the story you're telling, you become one with the image of the deity you're addressing yourself to. All these ways, you're doing essentially the same thing. So, finding the connection between them is not difficult, really. It's really just a process of finding the connection with yourself, or finding the connection with your own purpose, or kind of just turning around, Instead of doing your whatever it is you're doing with the focus of going out into the world, you go out into the world. You're meant to go out, and your senses are all tuned outwards. But also turn around and see where you're going from and why you're going. What's pulling you there? And when you get there, where are you exactly? Are you fully satisfied? Is that a fleeting moment, or would you like to stay there? So it was really that process. I was looking at all the aspects that went into excellence in dance, and that went into the creative process of dance. So the cultural background, the philosophical background, the social background, the way of life, all these, when you start studying them, you keep encountering the tantric way of life, the yogic way of life, the philosophical blueprints where there are the crossovers. And you also realize that if that is your objective, then you can do so many interesting things with the classical language, because you know where you're trying to go, you're trying to go to the same point. So you don't have to. For me, it was the revelation that if I'm working with the English language, or I'm working with contemporary music, or I'm, working in any way that is non-traditional, with classical tools, if that is my objective, you're not going to get lost. You're headed in exactly the same direction. And I think that is what's important for classical dance practitioners to understand. You don't have to feel I mean, when I was younger and that point after 17 years, I haven't made that connection.
Yeah. I really like all these processes and how you practice and how you bring that to, now I experienced it in the retreat that we just finished. And actually, there's a few things that you said that really inspired me. And I think I would like to say there to help maybe people to understand the way you practice now, because maybe it's maybe a bit difficult to catch, like what does that look like. So you say something like the whole point of working with the body is to find inner harmony. Or when you dance, try to dissolve the boundaries between the space within the body and the space outside the body. And also another one that I like. People are not here to watch you. They are there to travel through you. And they are not watching your body mechanics per se. They are really there to enter the energy vortex that you will be creating. So this is really yogic, tantric way of seeing the body, seeing movement, seeing...
Yeah, but they're all very practical.
Yeah.
They're all very practical. They're all studio-based experiences, and they change the way you engage with the body in a state of dance.
Yeah.
What do you want me to say? You've been through the class?
Yes. And I've realized so many things about my body, about my energy, about different things that were stuck in my body that I was totally not aware. And your work is like, at least at my stage, first of all is to first become more aware of the body, of the tension, and then relaxing them, and then at that point you can become like the vehicle and like let the energy flow and creating this nice energy vortex and transport people to your dance. So
Yes, absolutely.
yeah. Thank you for teaching them this. It's like the beginning of a process, I feel, even for me, and it's an amazing journey. And is there any to conclude, any specific and simple practice for people who are listening to this interview who feel inspired to connect with this kind of energy? Any simple practice that you can recommend people to do? It is complicated. Better you come to your class with Rekha, but for the meanwhile.
Well, I think a simple practice, something that we do before we start, is just becoming aware of your central axis. And becoming aware of the fact that if you just stand still and stand straight with your weight on your heels, and we've done this 30 times, feel the inside with your weight on your heels, feel your spinal cord being lifted up by a thread, and just allowing your weight to go through the two sides of the body, and allow your skeletal system to just open and be. And to treat your central axis as your link between the earth and the sky, and this channel. To not close yourself, keep that alignment, and to breathe, and to realize this breath is constantly going, constantly uniting the space within and the space without.
Yeah, exactly.
Also to be aware of how you're using your hands, because your hands are connected to your heart. So if you're constantly doing this, that's what you're doing energetically. If you can just be aware and be at ease. It's really just this alignment, that's the beginning. Alignment, awareness of the body. Watch your body. If you've got habitual tension or whatever, make friends with it. Don't ignore it.
Yes.
Just hold it and release it.
Yeah, and it seems very simple, but yeah, we started all the time with this kind of practice and it makes a huge difference. And it's always something that we are coming back. Even if we start dancing, we feel some tension, always coming back and do some relaxes and how you describe it works.
Yeah, and I mean, another thing that's very easy to see about the connection between the mind, the breath, and the body. You know, if your hands are tight, your breathing is shallow. If you come into a mudra like this, where your hands open, this tension is released. If you come into a mudra like this, you start feeling your abdominal muscles. You know, so you realize energetically how important, how important the way you inhabit your body is. And that's your medium, whether it's to dance, to do yoga, to live life. That's your medium, that's your shrine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Well,
thank you so much. I'm really amazed by the work that you do, and I really hope that more people will feel inspired. And, so next time I come back for sure. Thank you so much.
Always welcome.
Thank you.